Karen's voice sliced through the quiet street like a chainsaw through butter, her shrill demands echoing off the cookie-cutter houses. "You will join the HOA, old man, or I'll make your life hell," she screeched, her chins wobbling as she jabbed a manicured finger at Grandpa Joe, who stood on his porch, unfazed, sipping his coffee like it was just another Tuesday. The neighborhood knew Karen. Oh, they knew her. At 5 feet 4 inches and pushing 300 pounds, she waddled through the cul-de-sac like a self-appointed queen, her floral dresses clashing with her perpetual scowl. She was the HOA president, a title she wielded like a scepter, terrorizing anyone who dared plant a non-approved shrub or leave a bike on their lawn. But Grandpa Joe? He was different. At 78, he was a wiry old coot with a limp from an old war wound and a glint in his eye that said he'd seen worse than Karen in his day. And boy, had he. It all started 3 months ago when Joe moved into 23 Maple Drive, a modest ranch house with peeling paint and a garden that was more weeds than roses. The HOA had rules, strict ones, and Karen had made it her mission to enforce them. Joe, however, didn't give a rat's behind about her rules. He'd spent 30 years as a federal marshal, chasing down fugitives and staring down mob bosses. A clipboard-wielding busybody wasn't going to scare him. He refused to join the HOA, ignored her fines, and worst of all painted his mailbox bright red, a glaring middle finger to her beige-only color scheme. Karen took it personally. She'd storm over daily, leaving passive-aggressive notes taped to his door. "Your grass is 0.2 inches too long. Rectify immediately." Joe would chuckle, toss them in the trash, and crank his old jazz records loud enough to rattle her windows. The neighbors watched this feud like a slow-burn soap opera, whispering bets on who'd crack first. Nobody expected Karen to escalate it to this. That fateful evening, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky a bruised orange. Karen had had enough. She'd caught Joe watering his non-compliant petunias bright, rebellious blooms that mocked her meticulously curated neighborhood aesthetic. She stormed across the street, her flip-flops slapping the pavement, and pounded on his door. "You're breaking every rule in the book," she bellowed, her voice carrying to the neighbors peeking through their blinds. "I'm calling the cops." Joe leaned on his cane, his weathered face creasing into a smirk. "Go ahead, darlin'. Call 'em. I ain't scared of no sirens." His voice was gravelly, calm, like he was daring her to pull the trigger. And pull she did. Within 15 minutes, 2 squad cars rolled up, their lights flashing lazily in the twilight. Officers Daniels and Rivera stepped out, looking more annoyed than alarmed. Karen, arms crossed, stood triumphant, her double chin raised like she'd just won a war. "Officers," she began, her tone dripping with self-righteous glee. "This man refuses to comply with HOA regulations. He's a menace. He's defacing property, ignoring fines, and look at that mailbox. It's an eyesore." She gestured wildly at the red mailbox, which stood proudly by Joe's driveway, gleaming like a beacon of defiance. Officer Daniels, a lanky guy with a tired expression, scribbled something in his notepad. "Ma'am, HOAs aren't exactly our jurisdiction. This sounds like a civil matter." Karen's face reddened, her eyes bulging. "Civil matter? This is about community standards. He's lowering property values. I demand you arrest him." Rivera, shorter and stockier, raised an eyebrow. "Arrest him for what exactly?" "Painting his mailbox." "For violating the law." Karen snapped, stomping her foot. "He's a threat to this neighborhood." Joe, still on his porch, took a slow sip of his coffee. "You done yappin', Karen? 'Cause I got something to show these fine officers." He reached into his jacket pocket, moving deliberately, like a man who knew the weight of every gesture. The neighbors, now gathered at a safe distance, leaned forward. Karen scoffed, expecting some useless old man trick. What Joe pulled out wasn't a trick. It was a badge, not some cheap security guard pin, but a gleaming, official federal marshal's badge, worn but unmistakable, the kind that made you sit up straighter. Daniels and Rivera froze, their casual postures stiffening. Karen's smug grin faltered, her eyes darting between the badge and Joe's unflinching stare. Retired U.S. Marshal Joseph Callahan, Joe said, his voice low but commanding. Served 1965 to 1995. Chased down bank robbers, drug lords, you name it. I've dealt with worse than a loudmouth with a clipboard. He paused, letting the words sink in. Now, you want to talk about the law, Karen? Let's talk. The air went still. Daniels cleared his throat, suddenly looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Sir, we weren't aware. Karen cut in, her voice shrill with panic. That's fake. He's lying. He's just some old geezer trying to scare us. But her bravado was crumbling. The neighbors murmured, phones now out, recording the showdown. Joe didn't flinch. He pulled out a folded document from his pocket, a faded but official-looking letter of commendation from the Department of Justice, complete with seals and signatures. He handed it to Rivera, who scanned it, his eyes widening. This checks out, Rivera said, passing it to Daniels. Sir, we apologize for the disturbance. Karen's face was now the color of her forbidden petunias. This is ridiculous. You're taking his side? I'm the victim here. He's ruining our neighborhood. Joe stepped forward, his cane tapping the porch. Ruining it? Lady, I fought for this country while you were busy bullying folks over their lawnmowers. You think you can scare me with your little power trip? I've stared down men with guns. You ain't nothing. The neighbors erupted in stifled laughs and whispers. Karen's reign of terror was unraveling, and she knew it. She opened her mouth to retort, but Daniels raised a hand. Ma'am, you called us here on false pretenses. Wasting police time is a misdemeanor. You sure you want to keep pushing this? Karen's jaw dropped, her words choking in her throat. She looked around, seeing the neighbors' phones, their smirks, their judgment. For the first time, she was the one on trial. She sputtered, "This isn't over," and stormed off, her flip-flops slapping furiously as she retreated to her McMansion. But it was over. The next day, the neighborhood listserv lit up with posts. Someone leaked Karen's history of frivolous complaints, finding a single mom for her kids' chalk drawings, reporting a veteran for his unapproved flagpole. The tide turned. At the next HOA meeting, the board, fed up with her tyranny, voted her out. Joe, meanwhile, became a local legend. Kids started calling him Marshal Joe, and neighbors brought him pies, thanking him for standing up to the dragon. Karen moved away a month later, her house sold at a loss. Rumor had it she tried her antics in another town, only to get shut down again. Joe, he kept his red mailbox, planted more petunias, and played his jazz records louder than ever. The neighborhood was free, and the air felt lighter. Sometimes, the smallest acts of defiance, like a red mailbox or a quiet old man with a badge, can topple the loudest tyrants. Justice doesn't always come with sirens. Sometimes, it's just an old marshal, sipping coffee, waiting for the right moment to show his hand. The end.